Alright, so there are definitely a few videos or miniseries or pieces of content that people want me to check out, and I don't think there's anything that has gotten more recommendations than the Super Eye Patch Wolf videos about wrestling. Luckily, I do recall watching these videos when they first came out, and I didn't realize that they're a couple of years old now, so it's I guess it's fresh enough to go ahead and rewatch these and relive all those goosebumps. If you guys would like to see the content, if you have not seen it just yet, check the top link in the description and you'll be able to view it without me interacting and pausing and reacting all over the content. And if you're a youngin, I would probably advise you to not watch this video. I definitely do not use light language. I lean more towards a mature audience, so if you're a little one, scram. With that being said, let's check it out.
Okay, I'm guessing right about now, a lot of you are wondering why the hell a video about wrestling is showing up in your subscription feed. And I get it, wrestling is totally not for everybody. But it's also April 1st, which means your timeline is probably filled with April Fool's Day videos. And rather than add another to the pile, I thought I'd take this opportunity and do something a little different, and talk about a form of entertainment I've loved for basically my entire life. And if you hate professional wrestling, if you're wondering why I would debase myself covering such a
Okay, I'm already rehooked automatically. Persona OST. If you know, you know. If you don't, get acquainted. That definitely dates this video, by the way. Like Persona 5? That had to be like 6 years ago, yeah?
ridiculous subject clearly aimed at children, well, first off, I have some bad news for you about the rest of this channel, and second, you are actually the person I'm making this video for. My goal here isn't to turn you into a wrestling fan, just to try and help you understand why so many people are. And understanding the world around us is a good thing, right? Even the parts of it that seem really dumb and insane, right? Right. Okay.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. We're not just gonna breeze past my man just being absolutely assaulted by a fucking doll.
Really dumb and insane, right? Right. Okay, elephant in the room, wrestling is fake. And no, not even in the way Game of Thrones is fake. Professional wrestling is a pretend sport masquerading as a real one. These two women are not actually fighting, these two men do not actually hate each other, and this is not an actual evil voodoo priest named Papa Shango, it's Charles Wright, who's also played the role of a salty martial artist and a jovial pimp.
Oh, dox him? Wait, I didn't need to know his real name. Wait a minute. Whoa. Mr. Eyepatch Wolf, don't do that!
And he, alongside an entire industry of his fellow wrestlers, all work together as a highly choreographed physical theater, the goal of which is to...
Holy shit. Holy shit. See, that was sick. That drop kick, there was no bracing for that. His jaw is dislocated, by the way.
Together as a highly choreographed physical theater, the goal of which is to convince the audience that what they are seeing is an actual competitive event. This is the sticking point with a lot of people in wrestling, the idea that it's fake and not a legitimate sport, thus devaluing it as a piece of entertainment. But to me, wrestling isn't devalued by the fact that it's fake, rather it's fascinating because of it. And through this, in a very strange way,
Japanese wrestling is so good, bro. It's so good.
Can also be more real than virtually anything else on television. The revelation that wrestling is fake is not a new one, not by a long shot. It was in 1938 that North American newspapers stopped reporting the results of pro wrestling because at that point, journalists had become wise to the idea that the results of these matches were predetermined. Up until this point, wrestling had mainly been a sideshow at carnivals, but that changed when wrestling bookers learned two things. The first was that the sport was a lot more profitable for them if they learned two things.
Yeah, wait a minute. Alright. So, like, could you imagine putting your trust in the trained bear? You were really ready to go out there and wrestle a bear and hope he didn't go off script. You better not hope that bear doesn't just go, yo, what the fuck? I could kill this guy. I could definitely crush this guy's head like a water melon. I'm sorry, bro. There is no sanctions. There's nothing you can tell me to have me comfortable with, like, oh yeah, that bear, he could definitely sell a suplex. Excuse you? Excuse me? I'm excused. I'm leaving, actually.
Things. The first was that the sport was a lot more profitable for them if they could decide the outcome. But second, it was also a lot more entertaining for the audience. As rather than the matches being just a pure contest of strength and skill, where the winner could have all the potential charisma and charm of a bag of wet chalk, they could instead engage the crowd with heroes and villains and create rivalries and storylines around them, which would keep the audience coming back week after week. This would also skyrocket wrestling's popularity in the early days of television, turning what had started as a carny show into a national obsession, which also meant that now maintaining the illusion that wrestling was real was more critical than ever, and this is what led to the implementation of kayfabe. Kayfabe was originally a code word wrestlers used to signal to each other that there were fans or outsiders nearby, and so the illusion of wrestling would need to be maintained. But in a much broader sense, it's a term used to refer to the portrayal of stage events as real, and specifically of wrestling as a legitimate contest, and wrestling personas as actual people and real competitive athletes, meaning that wrestlers were expected to play their fictional wrestling personas whenever they were out in public, and so heroic wrestlers known as faces were expected to be friendly and kind to their fans, while villainous wrestlers known as heels were instructed to be unpleasant and antagonistic, and above all else, faces and heels were never ever to be seen together in public, as doing so would give way that the rivalry between the two was fabricated, thus exposing the secret reality of the business. The illusion of kayfabe was fiercely maintained even well into the 90s. As a wrestling fan, people were always eager to tell you that it was fake, but it was always easy to dismiss because it always came from people that disliked wrestling.
Brother, this ring gear looks horrible. This looks terrible, my guy. Oof. I was gonna comment on how tall bro looked, but nah.
But then, one fateful night on
Goddamn
May
Party
19th,
City muscle
1996, an incident would occur that would destroy the illusion of wrestling, and it was an incident known as the curtain call. The curtain call took place right in the center of Madison Square Garden, and it involved a group of 4 wrestlers who shared an off-camera friendship and were known backstage as the Clique. Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, Shawn Michaels, and Paul Levesque. This was the last night Hall and Nash would be performing under the banner of WWF, and the following day would be jumping ship to rival company WCW. Michaels and Nash were bitter rivals in WWF's storyline at this point, and in the final match of the night, Michaels was set to defeat Nash in a steel cage match. But what wasn't part of the script was what came after the match's conclusion when the cameras stopped rolling, when Michaels straddled his unconscious opponent and revived him with a Snow White-esque kiss. Fans looked on bewildered and stunned, and then, to add to the confusion, Hall and Levesque...
I didn't know he did the whole Snow White kiss thing. What the hell is that? The hell are you doing?
Not only did these 4 wrestlers not have an on-camera friendship, they were meant to actively despise one another, with Hall and Michaels both being beloved faces, and Nash and Levesque
Triple H had to catch all the heat for this.
If that was true, then why were they all in the ring hugging and celebrating? Were these guys actually friends? Oh my god. The incident never aired on national television, but it didn't matter. The advancement of home camcorder technology alongside the rise of the internet meant that the footage was captured by fans and free to rampage across the World Wide Web, and the result was that the illusion of kayfabe that professional wrestling had shrouded itself in for so many years was left tattered and broken, with wrestling audiences around the world faced with the now undeniable fact that wrestling was fake, and underneath the facade lay a separate reality, a reality that lay just below the surface, tantalizingly out of sight. This is what would lead to the modern era of pro wrestling. To wrestling fans now, the secret that wrestling is scripted is not a secret. Instead, what
camera
we have
angle
now
was
is a
insane on
form
that
of
phenomenal
entertainment
form.
that exists in two separate realities: the fictional world of kayfabe and the actual real-life business and politics behind it. Which leaves us with the question: if wrestling is fake and that knowledge is widely known, then what then is the appeal of it? If someone wants to watch a genuine contest of skill and strength, then why not just go watch UFC? And the answer to that lies in the fundamental difference between the two, that this is a competition and this is a story. Wrestling, like so many other forms of fiction, is about telling stories. I want you to look at these clips and forget for a moment that you're watching wrestling.
All right, one second. Okay, so when it comes to like watching MMA and UFC and shit, I'll never forget. I went to one of my friend's fight parties. It was a Anderson Silva fight, and I was so excited. I even bet a little bit of money. This motherfucker threw a kick and broke his leg, bro. I will never forget. Yo, my face was so straight. It hurt. My face hurt. Oh my god, my face hurt so much with how straight. I was like, there's no fucking way. There's zero fucking way. All this build up for this motherfucker to go in there and break his leg. Boy. Oh, I'll never forget the pain I felt. I couldn't even eat, and I was like, yo, gotta watch this fucking leg flap around. You never know what you're gonna get with UFC. That's the whack part. They might really run at each other, and someone just jumps up and gets jabbed and gets knocked out in 7 seconds. Nice pay-per-view, bro. Could you imagine if Roman Reigns went up against Cody Rhodes and he got like a roll-up pin in 7 seconds? Matter of fact, we had something like that, right? Fucking Brock versus Kofi. Nice. Fantastic. Oh, God. Oh, I cannot.
Just try and imagine your own body performing these maneuvers. Think about the years of training it would take to be able to move like this, and about the timing and trust you need to have in another person to execute these sequences. And ask yourself, what is all that effort for?
Oh my goodness.
What is actually being achieved here? And the answer is that they're building a narrative through the suspension of disbelief. The suspension of disbelief is the simultaneous belief in two inconsistent things. Anyone who watches The Matrix believes both that we're watching a fight between Neo and Morpheus, but is aware that we're actually watching Keanu Reeves and Lawrence Fishburne perform a choreographed sequence of actions being shot on a film set. And it's the filmmaker's job to make it as easy on the audience as possible to suppress that second idea, which is why solid acting, writing, and editing is so important, because a discrepancy in any particular one could break the audience's immersion, destroying our investment in the story. But immersion is also something that's created in very different ways in different forms of art. Take the far simpler medium of rakugo. Rakugo is a minimalist form of Japanese theater involving a single actor kneeling on stage, whose only props are a fan and a piece of cloth. And with this ultra-minimalist setup, they play out entire stories, even embodying multiple characters, using subtle gesturing and posing along with tonal inflection to convey different people. And so the immersion, the suspension of disbelief, is created purely through the physical performance of the actor. A skilled rakugo can make it feel like an actual story with a full cast of characters is playing out in front of us, despite the fact we can very clearly see it's just one person kneeling on stage.
Good job, I need. That should look fun as hell.
Works works the exact same way. Just like film,
Stand
just
up,
like
your knees
racquetball,
fucking
what
clicking
the
and shit like,
performers are ultimately trying to do is make us believe that what we're seeing is real. And not only just in the staged violence, but also by embodying these characters and their emotions. One of the things I love about Kaneko Arai, real name to former NXT Women's Champion Asuka, is that from the moment she steps out into an arena, everything from her wardrobe to the way she walks to how she plays with the camera embodies this fascinating fictional character, a bizarre, violent person who takes distinct glee in breaking her opponents apart. And because of how good Arai is at conveying this character both through her wrestling and the subtlety of her actions, you don't see the actual performance behind it. You just see Asuka, the Empress of Tomorrow. This is something that all great wrestlers do.
She's awesome,
the embodiment
bro. She's
of
great.
A fictional persona, a character. And so all a wrestling match is what happens when two of these fictional characters meet at particular points in their lives and the story that unfolds through that. Granted, that might sound a little weighty, so to show this, pretending to show respect to Hart to lower his guard, but begins to decimate his younger opponent with a string of vicious illegal assaults. Until finally, Hart, now bloody and battered, rallies, gaining a read on his opponent once again and countering everything Piper can throw at him on his ring bell, and is about to use it to put... There is so much to this match. It's basically an entire fallen hero slash villain redemption story arc told in 16 minutes without any dialogue, purely conveyed through the... From here, Piper's career would start to fade, and Brett, after years of success, would eventually find himself in a match where the roles were reversed, where now he was the veteran the crowd had turned against as he faced off against the new rising star of the company, Stone Cold Steve Austin. This is what professional wrestling is, and while it's not always good or even socially acceptable, when it's at its best, it can be exciting, to funny, to even occasionally
brother was definitely getting hung right there.
And the knowledge, in the same way that knowing Yusuke versus Toguro is just a bunch of cells being photographed in rapid succession, doesn't take away from the emotional impact of that. Okay, everything we just talked about, that's all the kayfabe side of wrestling, the fictional performance created by the wrestlers and writing staff. But as we mentioned earlier, there is another side to wrestling, and that's the actual reality behind it. When you begin to look into the industry of pro wrestling for long enough, a strange thing starts to happen, and that is that the line between what's real and what isn't gradually begins to blur, and the actual reality of the business begin to bleed into one another. And identifying the point where one starts and the other ends becomes nearly impossible. And to show this, we need to go back to the curtain call. The curtain call and its shattering of kayfabe was seen by many of the wrestlers and staff within the WWF as an appalling attack on wrestling, and so there had to be punishment. Someone had to pay the price for this transgression. It couldn't be either Scott Hall or Kevin Nash, as they had both already left the company, and it couldn't be Shawn Michaels because he, at the time, was the current WWF champion and already a problem in many other areas. And so the entirety of the blame fell on Paul Levesque, an upper mid-card wrestler with a lot of potential who seemed bound for greatness. And as punishment, his entire career was derailed. And he found
Triple H looks weird without a beard to be now.
Again, being forced to endure a string of humiliating losses in matches that showed him as weak and ineffective, with other wrestlers shrugging off his attacks and quickly and easily defeating him. Writing like this is devastating to a wrestler's career. It destroys the fictional credibility a wrestling persona has with the audience, and therefore severely damages their ability to draw a crowd and thus earn a living wage. But this was the new reality that Levesque now faced. None of this was part of the actual WWF storyline or even mentioned on TV. From the audience's perspective, all that was happening was Levesque was a wrestler who used to win a lot and then suddenly stopped. Now, let's take a moment that came 4 years later. At this point, Levesque had sweat and bled his way back to the top of the card and had been reborn as title contender Triple H. And in an interview that was meant to be kayfabe, that was meant to be scripted,
he does look weird.
Happened.
Watch your language.
Yeah, they
What,
buried
you
the
want me to
fuck
show
out of
you
him.
Is it the fictional wrestling persona Triple H, or is it the actual human being behind the persona, Paul Levesque, saw his career ruined? And the answer is that it's both. It's both Triple H and Paul Levesque. And the result is that there's an honesty and an anger that's genuinely captivating as the reality starts to fuel the fiction. And there are dozens of incidents like this that have taken place throughout the years of wrestling. The Montreal Screwjob, the forced retirement and recent return of Daniel Bryan, and Pot, in which former wrestler CM Punk took to a mic and verbally rended the entire WWE, laying waste to the management, his fellow wrestlers, and even his own fans.
I'm barely promoted. I don't get to be in movies. I'm certainly not on any crappy show on the USA Network. But the fact that Dwayne is in the main event of WrestleMania next year and I'm not makes me sick.
Bill, like I said before when the pipe bomb came up, they knew they had to just let him talk. Whenever he got the mic, just let him talk. Give him like a good little 3-minute segment, because they had nothing but fucking gold. It takes balls as like management to be like, yo, let him just fucking cook us. Let him just fucking say what he wants to say about us for a little bit. Because the fans are eating this up. Yeah, man, he was absolutely going crazy. Yeah, he was definitely getting whatever he had on his chest off. Like, that is ridiculous levels of, oh, nah, you need to stop him. We still need those ice cream bars.
To me is what's so uniquely captivating about wrestling. Out of all forms of entertainment, in no other is the line between fiction and reality so delicate and malleable, where the fourth wall is so
going crazy.
fragile, and when it does finally give way, it can lead to some of the most intense and oddly sincere storytelling in any form of entertainment. As fake as wrestling can be, these are the moments when it becomes shockingly real. These moments show something else also, and that is that at its heart, wrestling is just a story about people. No matter how theatrical a wrestling persona is, at its core, it's just a person. One as real and flawed as anyone else. And when you start to watch wrestling for long enough, it's the stories of these people that become the main draw as you watch them grow and age and change. So to conclude this video, I want to talk about one of these stories. I want to talk about the saga of the Golden Lovers. Our story begins in 2008 as two young wrestlers wage war on one another. The first is Kota Ibushi, a young, supremely talented Japanese wrestler who seems bound for greatness. And the other is Kenny Omega, a Canadian wrestler who, after seeing tapes of Ibushi's matches, felt destined to face him. And so he issued an open challenge to Kota, which Ibushi accepted, and so Omega traveled to Japan and a showdown took place that was messy, brutal, and mesmerizing.
Holy
Ibushi
shit.
eventually took the victory, but it didn't matter. Over the course of the match, the two wrestlers realized something. There was a connection here. Both wrestlers believed that wrestling could be more than just wrestling. It could be a vehicle for comedy, a way to tell stories, hell, it could even be art. And together, the two resolved to change the world of wrestling. Omega uproots his entire life and moves to Japan to be closer to Ibushi. And rather than become rivals, they form a tag team, initially being pitched as the Golden Brothers, but Omega and Ibushi prefer the name the Golden Lovers. The Golden Lovers are on a level few other tag teams can even approach.
Not the kids.
There's a kinship and a synchronicity here that fuels their matches. But what's more, they seem genuinely delighted to be around each other, both in the ring and outside it. and
Aw,
that
that's
chemistry
fire,
shows
man.
in their exceptional teamwork and performances, with the Japanese audience embracing them wholeheartedly as they capture
That was definitely
multiple
Finn
tag
getting fucked
titles.
up.
And by 2011, it feels like their dream is beginning to come true. The Golden Lovers are inseparable, and they are changing the face of wrestling. But slowly, a gap starts to form between the two. While Kota only needs to rely on his God-given natural talents, Kenny often struggles, having to work hard to overcome his own weakness and to keep pace with Ibushi, and he starts to feel outpaced by his genius partner. Kota's genius doesn't go unnoticed either. He's being given more opportunities as a single wrestler, and what's more, he's winning, and with each victory, Kenny feels a little more left behind. And so on August 18th, 2012, after 3 years of partnership, the two face each other. And what follows is one of the most spectacular matches in history. Kota fighting for his pure love of wrestling,
Holy
and Kenny
shit, these
desperately
sequences,
battling
dude.
as to not be left behind by the person he cares about the most. But it's not enough. He cannot overcome the genius of Ibushi. And afterwards, both wrestlers look devastated. Kenny for the loss, and Kota for having inflicted it upon him. Over the next 2 years, the gap between the two would only continue to widen. Ibushi continues to rise, even going so far as to face the legendary King of Strong Style Shinsuke Nakamura. But meanwhile, Kenny struggles without his former partner, gaining only modest wins and racking up several major losses, including one especially crushing defeat at the hands of Prince Devitt, a member of the villainous Bullet Club, a vicious faction of American wrestlers who spit in the face of Japanese pro wrestling, overwhelming opponents with their superior numbers and brutal tactics. And the experience changes Omega. He can't help feel that now, without Ibushi by his side, he is alone, but Devitt has an entire army of allies behind him, and so a realization dawns on him. Maybe with the Bullet Club, he could finally become strong enough to stand as an equal with Ibushi. And so 2 weeks later, he emerges as their newest member. And it works. He wins and he keeps winning until the day finally comes when his mentor and leader of the Bullet Club, AJ Styles, faces Kota for the IWJP Heavyweight Championship. In typical Bullet Club fashion, Kenny was expected to sabotage Ibushi, but he can't. He holds back for the entire match until its final moments, when Ibushi scales the turnbuckle and is seconds from victory, only to turn his head and see Kenny standing on the ring apron, and the two lock eyes. And Kenny becomes paralyzed between his loyalty for the Bullet Club and his feelings towards his former partner, and so fails
the
to
storytelling god,
but this momentary distraction is just enough time for Styles to recover, and he counters Ibushi's attack.
Yo, he landed into the Styles clash? That is crazy.
Omega is visibly shaken, while Ibushi lies devastated both by the loss and the betrayal of his former partner. Not long after, Ibushi disappears from the Japanese wrestling scene, while Omega only continues to grow more ruthless, vicious, and victorious. And he begins to dominate New Japan, shrouding himself in the indestructible armor of the Bullet Club and even deposing Styles as its leader, taking the crown for himself. This new invincible Kenny Omega even makes it to the very final of the G1 Climax, the most elite wrestling tournament in the entire world. But his conquest has taken its toll, and he enters the match battered and exhausted, facing the immovable and dangerous Hiroki Goto, who punishes Omega again and again, constantly pushing him to the brink of defeat. And as the light of victory begins to fade away, Omega reaches deep down inside himself, and what he finds is his old partner Ibushi, whose finisher, the Shining Star Powerbomb, he uses in a final sequence of moves to overcome Goto and take the win. And so finally he's done it. He's the best in the world. But without Ibushi by his side, how much does it actually mean? This inner conflict is only made worse when a year later Omega suffers a crushing loss in the finals of the same tournament.
Holy shit, was that?
Comes face to face with Ibushi for the first time since his betrayal, and Ibushi reaches out to comfort Omega, but Kenny cannot accept it. Things have gone too far. It's too late. And slowly, the unbreakable armor Omega has surrounded himself in begins to crack and crumble, and sensing weakness, the other members of the Bullet Club begin to turn on him, with the American Nightmare Cody Rhodes using his feelings for Ibushi as a weapon against him, culminating in a savage attack on Koda, only to have Omega furiously defend his former partner. This eventually leads to the Bullet Club turning on Kenny, destroying him with a vicious assault,
man, that's
only
so...
for Ibushi to run to the ring and save his former partner. And then, in a moment that's been 10 years in the making,
tattoo Cody Rhodes.
the two finally just stand in the ring and face one another. Ibushi desperate to reform their partnership, but it's just too late. Too much has happened and the scars run too deep. Omega cannot accept his former partner. Until... After a story 10 years in the making, the Golden Lovers are reunited. What's so incredible to me about the saga of the Golden Lovers is that it's a story that could only really occur in wrestling. One that's about two people who felt a connection and formed something beautiful, only to later be torn apart by the different directions life pulled them in, and then finally, years later, to realize what really mattered. And what's more, identifying what's real here and what isn't is nearly impossible. Omega was genuinely a young wrestler who was inspired by a videotape of Ibushi. Ibushi's talent did outshine Omega, and the two were genuinely caught between their love of competing together and their aspirations as single wrestlers. And as a result, there's a heart and a strife to this story that's so genuine and real. And I think at its best, that's what wrestling can be. Yes, it's fake, but that doesn't mean it can't be honest. Doesn't mean its stories can't be about real things that we can all relate to. This is why I'm still a fan, why so many people are, and why I think at least that professional wrestling is fascinating.
Oh yeah.
Friends, thank you for joining me today, and particularly...
This video was as good as I remember it being. Like, I think the pacing, the storytelling, the music choices, all of it, like, worked together to get the point across, like, 100%. Absolutely awesome. If you guys haven't seen the 4 wrestling videos that they've, that Super Eyepatch Wolf have done on his channel, you should definitely check them out. I'm going to be leaving the link to this one in the top of the description so you can check it out for yourself. But, yeah, we're going to be covering the other ones on the channel as well. But, it got to the point where I felt bad, like, interrupting the video to react to it. Just because, like, I was fucking enthralled. Like, I was gripped by the video, too. Like, I was sitting there like, wait, what the fuck? So good. It's so good. So good, man. Oh.